The end of an era. Japan's longest-serving leader is stepping down. Will he be remembered fondly as an economic reformer or a prime minister who failed to deliver a better nation? I'm Ali Aslan, and today's newsmaker is Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe hailed from a political dynasty, so a life in government was always on the card. He was first elected to parliament in 1993, and by 2006 he'd become Japan's youngest post-war prime minister. Illness had forced him to step down once before. He made a comeback, but now this resignation appears to be final. The ruling party's race to replace him is underway. But what kind of Japan is Shinzo Abe leaving to his successor? Adam Pletz reports.
Shinzo Abe stepped down just 4 days after becoming Japan's longest continuously serving prime minister. Abe attributed his resignation to a medical condition, ulcerative colitis, which had also forced him to quit during his first term in 2007.
任期をあと1年、まだ1年残し、他のさまざまな政策が実践途上にある中、コロナ禍の中、職を辞することとなったことについて、国民の皆様に心よりお詫びを申し上げます。
He's bowing out while his approval ratings are close to an all-time low, but he's also leaving a significant legacy. Japan's economic policy during his leadership has come to bear his name, Abenomics. Its formula of increased government spending, massive monetary stimulus, and structural reforms has borne mixed results. More controversially, his revisionist views of Japan's Second World War record have drawn criticism from China and South Korea, as have his ambitions to remove Article 9 of the Constitution, which bans Japan from recourse to war. And while these policies may have made many at home uncomfortable, it's his government's handling of the coronavirus that has seen his popular support plummet in recent months. Since Abe's Liberal Democratic Party enjoys a large majority in Parliament, whoever is elected to lead it in his place will become Prime Minister until elections in late 2021. There are 3 candidates for the party president, but the runaway favourite is Yoshihide Suga, Abe's cabinet secretary. All the contenders are seen, to some degree, as continuity figures, but many view Suga as the choice for an Abe government without Abe.
前線全霊を傾けて進めてこられた取り組みをしっかり継承し、さらに前に進めるために私の持てる力をすべて尽くす覚悟であります。
Whoever takes office has a daunting set of challenges ahead, among them the North Korean nuclear threat and balancing Japan's relationship between China and the US. There is also pressure to renegotiate Japan's hosting agreement for US soldiers. As the Abe era comes to an end, how will history remember his time at the helm? And how will Japan's new premier steer the world's 3rd largest economy into the future? Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
Well, let's cross over to Tokyo now, where I am joined by Ichiro Fujisaki, who was the Japanese ambassador to the US, the UN, and the WTO. He's also a former deputy foreign minister. And in Singapore is Waqas Adenwala. He's an Asia analyst at the Economist intelligence unit. Gentlemen, welcome to this show. Ichiro, obviously, Shinzo Abe now has been the longest serving Japanese prime minister with 8 years. He now resigned due to health reasons. Many people say that he transformed Japanese politics. Would you concur? Would you agree?
Yes, but at the same time, I have to say that, yes, he was renounced by Chinese and Koreans, that he tried to make a revisionist view of the World War II. But in reality, that was a little bit of exaggeration. We don't think so. And as for the constitution as well, what he was proposing that was that we have to prescribe the existence of self-defense forces in the constitution, and it's not to sort of delete peace clause or anything. Maybe he had that idea in the beginning, but the government of Japan is now in coalition with the LDP and one more Buddhist party, and that kind of rightist move cannot be accepted by the other side. And so all in all, that was not such a drastic change that he was trying to do, as was sketched. At the same time, it's true that he tried to reform Japan, won security legislature for the first time. Now we can go to defend the United States because we have introduced collective self-defense. This is security legislature. The one more thing is TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. U.S. pulled out from that, but the Japan made that TPP the trade sort of pact among the Asia-Pacific countries, and also, unlike United States, we remained in Paris Accord, and we supported nuclear deal with Iran, and so our policy was not that extreme as. Very frankly, United States policy not is taken. But his important contribution is that he was able to make a good relations with Mr. Trump. And that was not possible for many other leaders. And because of that, I think Japan had a very stable diplomatic policy and environment.
Right.
I think the way he sort of tried to deal with Mr. Trump was that he didn't preach like some European leaders.
Ichiro, you covered quite a bit of ground here in your first answer, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy. Waqas, how will Abe be remembered?
You have to break that out into domestic economic policies and foreign policy. The honorary ambassador has already mentioned quite a few foreign policy bits, so I'll cover the domestic economy bits. His signature policy, Abenomics, was obviously known for aggressive fiscal and monetary policy and structural reforms. Structural reforms were the third arrow, which unfortunately were not so strongly dealt with. Yes, the Bank of Japan has been easing for the longest time. Fiscal policy in Japan has been pretty aggressive, which has eventually led to Japan having the highest debt to GDP ratios, which is quite high. But it's the third arrow, which is something that needs to be considered, which has not been fully dealt with, which are reforms. For instance, Abe wanted to touch about Abenomics, but gender parity still remains low in Japan. He also wanted to do a lot more things about regulatory reforms, but a lot of sectors still could have been reformed a lot more. And yes, Abe did quite a bit, but if you see the fact that before him was a whole revolving door of prime ministers, the stability he had could have been employed better to achieve a lot more for Japan. If you come from foreign policy account, I agree, yes, Abe was in a tough spot. And with his resignation, Trump has lost his only friend in the world effectively. But a lot of promises that Abe made himself have not been delivered. He promised to get abductees returned from North Korea. That didn't happen. He also was aiming to get a peace treaty signed with Russia. That didn't happen either, unfortunately. And yes, I think South Korea and China were reading a bit too much with the revision of the constitution. I think Japan has full right to address those issues. But it's the issue about, comfort women and other issues such as labor disputes with Korea, which really made the relations quite sour. There's partly blame to be placed on the lack of, Trump's, transactional diplomatic policies, which put Japan and South Korea in an awkward position. But that's where I see Abe will be remembered for his mixed history rather than completely glorious parts as the longest-serving prime minister there.
Ichiro, if one of the things that Abe certainly gets credit for is many people are saying he put Japan back on the world map. That's perhaps also due to the longevity of his reign. He was able to foster and build relationships with other world leaders, and Japan now matters in world affairs. You're obviously at the forefront of shaping Japanese foreign policy for many years. You must have felt this firsthand, no?
Exactly. When I was ambassador in the United States, my top job, or the most important job, was to tell Americans that Japan matters, because China was looming and Japan was sort of slipping back. So that was my main message. But now my successors don't need to do that. I think thanks much to Mr. Abe, and everyone knows Japan matters. Now, just 2 points. I think coronavirus has really damaged some of the Abe's reputation, but in fact, Japan's death toll, or the infected, are a lot smaller than United States or Europe or China. So our performance is not too bad. So that's not the only reason. The reason, very important reason, and if I may say, Economist is my favorite magazine. However, I was reading this, but this doesn't touch an important element. That is that he lost his popularity because there were too many domestic scandals or issues, and how government dealt with that didn't get the sort of credibility of the people. The falsification of documents, or how he dealt with the public prosecutor's appointment, and it's a bit like Roger Stone in the United States, if I may. A bit of exaggeration, though, but.
For sure, and the plug for the Economist that has been received. But Waqas, indeed, Ichiro has mentioned that Abe, of course, is resigning in the midst of a pandemic, and this was going to be Japan's year with the Olympic Games, obviously, which had to be postponed. Do you think he's stepping down on a bit of a downer due to the context and the circumstances?
Unfortunately, yes, but I don't think it was in his hand. I mean, obviously, it's health concerns which were beyond his control, and then coronavirus too, which was not in his control. So yes, the timing is very poor. He obviously is resigning at a time when his domestic popularity is very low. All the gains that Abenomics had achieved over the economic growth, they've practically been erased. When GDP numbers for the second quarter came early this week, they showed Japan's economy is now at the lowest point since 2010. So all the gains that Shinzo Abe had achieved during his 8-year tenure and even before, they have effectively been erased. That's not his fault, unfortunately, but where we can see the fact is that, yes, through Abenomics, growth could have been higher. Japan's economy could have been even bigger. The gate of trying to get nominal growth up to 600 trillion yen could have been achieved a bit sooner. That's where the concerns lie. But again, obviously, coronavirus and his own health were something that no one could have predicted.
Do you think, Ichiro, this is a very inopportune time to change leaders for a country that is facing the challenges that all the other nations out there are facing, namely battling a pandemic? Do you think this will have any impact on how Japan is tackling the coronavirus?
I don't think so at all, because as you said at the outset, the successor to be is already in the government and has been dealing with Mr. Abe for more than 7 years. So I'm talking about Chief Cabinet Secretary, who is assumed to be the next leader. And the others had been Foreign Minister or Chief Cabinet Secretary as well, and it's in the same party. And so I don't think that's a big change. One more thing I would like to add is that now Abe announced that he's going to be resigning, and his popularity rate has gone up for 20% point. So I think longevity was good as well, but people thought that was changed, and people are grateful to him, but people think that it may be a good time to change as well.
Waqas, 8 consecutive years in office would hardly be breaking news in countries like Germany, France, or the US, but it certainly is in Japan, where leaders tended to change on an annual basis almost. Do you think that also has set a new precedent, that any other leader from now on will have to measure him or herself up to the long reign of Abe?
It would be unfortunate if they actually have to, because they have very big shoes to fill in. Shinzo Abe achieved a long tenure, which I don't think many future prime ministers will be able to achieve anytime soon. I mean, Suga is going to be a very good replacement because, like Ichiro-san mentioned, he is a continuity factor. He was in the government himself, and it's also the same political party, but he's also 71. So we don't see him serving for the next 8 years. Even in future, other factional politics are likely to come into play within the ruling party that will probably prevent anyone from serving as strongly as Abe did for that long.
Ichiro, you
But
already...
Waqas,
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. Biden is 77 years old. Mr. Trump, 74.
No, it's true. Just Japanese do tend to have the longest, they can live for far too long, but then there might be others in the pipeline too, waiting for him.
Well, Ichiro, you have already alluded to the potential successor to Abe. You mentioned Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga Yoshihide, who might or might not be confirmed on September 14th when the Liberal Democratic Party will vote and nominate a successor. Tell us a little bit more about him. He's obviously a bit of an unknown quantity on the international stage.
Yes, he's like the Chief Cabinet Secretary is like White House Chief of Staff who doesn't come out to foreign press or to the foreign leaders. He's the gatekeeper in the Abe cabinet, so that's why he's not that seen. But I think his very strong point is that when you first explain about Mr. Abe, he is from dynasty. This Suga-san is totally not that type. He came from a small town and wasn't able to, started working when he was after high school and then enrolled into university afterwards, and he became a private secretary to a House member, the representative, and then made his way up from municipal level. So he's a self-made man, and that's, I think, more down to earth from that point. And that's one important appeal I think he'll have to foreign people, that he's a self-made man. And also, he's a very sure sort of a gatekeeper, and he's the one who do the business. So I think that from that point, I think the foreign leaders could trust on him if he says this or that. I think that's the most important point. And so I think he is just starting now. He'll be meeting foreign leaders, and he'll be starting to, I think, I hope he will inform his vision,
right,
how he would like to make Japan and the world. So let's see what he'll say.
And indeed, and being the Chief Cabinet Secretary probably will stand for continuity of many of Abe's policies. Waqas, and whoever will succeed Abe, the challenges for the successor will have his work cut out for himself, because you do have an economy that is hampered by COVID-19. You have a rapidly shrinking, declining population, so the demographic challenges of Japan are many folds. The growing assertiveness, of course, of China, and a somewhat unpredictable ally in the United States. A lot on the plate for the next Japanese Prime Minister.
Indeed. I mean, you've listed all the issues that are literally something that, the next Prime Minister will have to look into more deeply. Yes, other factors should be considered, but when you have a contracting economy, a health crisis at hand, all of the things will be put in the back burner. The next few months will spatially be difficult, obviously, but you also have the US elections coming up. That will be a major turning point for US-Japan relationships too, because the US has been demanding that the Japanese and even the Koreans and Germans and all should pay more for hosting those forces. That will be a bit of a challenge because, yes, Trump and Abe enjoyed a very special relationship. Like I mentioned earlier, Trump is losing one of his closest political friends on the global arena. So Suga's task will definitely be to starting from scratch on that foreign policy front. Domestic policy is definitely very set and clear. The party lines are very surely set out. So there'll be strong continuity of all, whether it's monetary policy or fiscal policy or other aspects of it.
Ichiro, some people have accused Abe for not going with the time. At the end of the day, he, of course, belongs to a somewhat older, more conservative generation of politicians, but they're saying he's not going with the time. Even the public, Japanese public, has shifted their attitude on issues like same-sex marriage, dual citizenship, but he himself has not budged on those. Clearly, Suga Yoshihide will probably not break with that older, more conservative attitude, will he?
I think one of the most important legislature Mr. Abe has done is to bringing in the foreign workers to Japan. We were, very frankly, sort of closed society. And Abe and Suga thought, hey, we cannot go like that for too many years. And 3 years ago, they changed the legislature and tried to introduce foreign workers into Japan. Because of coronavirus, it's not possible now, but I think afterwards we could do that. So he's not that sort of only conservative as well. And I think one of the reasons about same-sex marriage or whatever is that Japanese people are not maybe as modern as some of the European or American people, and has been sort of watching the world and then stepping. So I think it's not the prime minister who was sort of dragging people back, but it's the Japanese people who were thinking that, hey, can we go that quick as well? That's my person. I'm an old man, so maybe because I'm saying this, but I feel that way.
Waqas, what do you make of particularly the changing demographics within Japan that have transformed many societies before, and now Japan is in front of a huge challenge? Obviously, it needs an input, young, dynamic input, perhaps from the outside.
Definitely from the outside, because it's not happening from the inside, unfortunately, in Japan. We see Japanese population is contracting by 500,000 each year. So yes, one thing I do give credit to Abe is that, yes, he did open up the economy a bit slowly, but definitely better late than never, because they are aware that there might be a demographic cliff sooner than later. So yes, their plan is to actually allow around up to 350,000 foreign workers into 14 sectors which are facing extreme shortage of labor. That's where Japan is targeting, that yes, they do identify a lot of sectors are definitely falling short of what they need to be. That's evident from the fact that Japanese unemployment rate has not spiked up despite the coronavirus crisis as compared to a lot of other countries. So yes, they're aware that labor market issues stemming from demographic problems are a major issue. Compared to, yes, I agree with Ichiro-san that yes, Japanese society is a bit different from the rest of the world, but those are cultural aspects, and that can be said for any society for that matter. So it will take time for people to evolve with that situation. For instance, Koizumi's son is, again, one of the promising political candidates for the future, but he's only 39, considerably too young for Japanese politics. He has relatively newer ideas, and I think Shinzo Abe adding him to the cabinet is a very welcome idea, that at least there can be some fresh blood in the cabinet who can at least reflect the opinions of the youngsters in Japan, that yes, this is what the younger Japanese generation thinks about. These are the issues that they want to look into, whether it's about same-sex marriage or it's about environmental issues or about climate change. These are all factors that will be changing the next world in the next few years, if not even decades.
For sure. Ichiro, we're almost out of time, but 8 years of Abe in office, clearly as any other political leader, he has a mixed record. Some issues he has succeeded on, some he has fallen short. Ichiro, would you say that his stint by and large is a successful one, has been a successful one?
Yes, by and large, but our relations with Russia and North Korea still remains a big problem. As for domestic issues, I forgot to mention bringing in women labor into our workforce, and he was very successful in doing that. But in foreign front, yes, I think his successor has to do the homework of especially Russia and North Korea. As for China relations, it's improving a lot, and I think it's good. And our relations with ASEAN countries, if you look at ASEAN countries and do the poll, the most reliable country the ASEAN people think is not China, not United States, not Europe, it's Japan. And I think it's not only Abe's contribution, but we are very grateful to what other people are thinking about us at the moment. Thank you.
Ichiro Fujisaki and Waqas Adenwala, thank you for putting 8 years of Shinzo Abe's stint as Japanese Prime Minister into context, looking back, pointing out the highlights, some of the ups and downs. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you out there, of course, for watching. Hope to see you again next time when we're back with a new edition of Newsmakers.